Nico Harrison is out as general manager of the Dallas Mavericks. I've had a couple of days to think about it. Now we're going to talk about it. All right, it is a monologue here on RealGM Radio. If you missed my episode earlier this week with Mike Shearer from Basketball Poetry, we broke down the Miami Heat's fast-paced offense. We also talked about our long list of most improved player candidates. But the story of the week, the big headline around the NBA, is that the Mavericks have finally fired general manager Nico Harrison after the debacle of the Luka Doncic trade. The Mavericks off to a slow start. Anthony Davis is hurt. Kyrie Irving got hurt late last year and obviously hasn't played yet. And things just look like a total mess in Dallas. Fire Nico chants every single home game. You have Jason Kidd and PJ Washington on the record talking about how that was a distraction to the team. And basically, every time the Dallas Mavericks lost, it wasn't just a loss. It was a loss plus, and also we traded Luka. And ultimately, Nico Harrison couldn't outrun that. The Dallas Mavericks organization couldn't get past that. And now they're trying to turn the page, and they're doing it by firing Nico Harrison. There's a lot more work to be done. I am going to talk about what comes next for Dallas, and I am going to talk about some potential Anthony Davis trades here in a second. But I do think it's important at least to go backwards and rethink and kind of recontextualize what all just happened here over the last several months since the trade deadline in February. And we don't have to get into the details of the trade again, right? We understand what it was. We understand that it was bad. Everybody knew that it was bad right away. There was very few people being like, well, actually, no. Everybody kind of understood right away, you do not trade a guy like Luka Doncic. You just don't do it. And we can get into the fact that they didn't, even if you were going to trade him, the fact that they didn't shop him, the fact that there was only one suitor with the Lakers and that they negotiated in a vacuum, that they didn't get Austin Reeves in the deal. All of the stuff that was bad, we know about it. It's bad. It's bad. It's horrible. And Nico Harrison lost his job because of it. And rightly so, right? It was malpractice, what he did. And he doesn't deserve to be the general manager of the Mavericks anymore. But I'm less interested in how bad the trade was, because we already know that part of it. And I'm more interested in the why it happened. And how we ended up at a place where Nico Harrison opened himself up to exactly what just happened, to losing his job. And that's the part of this that I can't really square. And there's been a little bit of reporting on this about how Nico Harrison was just over it with Luka Doncic and his off-the-court habits, that he didn't think that he could play defense at a championship-winning level, that he just didn't think he had what it took to be great, even though he was arguably already great. The guy, 5 first-team All-NBAs, like the guy was already great. We know that Nico Harrison was sort of just checked out on him. But is that really the reason why? Like, that's it? That's how you ended up in this place? That part still doesn't make sense to me. The number one job for any general manager, it's not to win a championship. That's what they'll tell you in press conferences. That's what they'll say in interviews. The number one job isn't to win a championship. The number one job for a general manager or anybody in a front office or any position of power in sports, your number one job is keep the job. And the reason why this Luka trade was so shocking, one of the reasons why it was so shocking, is that we never see a trade like this because it opens you up to losing your job. Had Nico Harrison not traded Luka Doncic, he's still in charge in Dallas. John Horst over in Milwaukee, you could complain about a lot of the moves that he made. You could debate whether or not the Damian Lillard thing worked out or didn't, the Drew Holiday trading him away, and all these other things. Buying Damian Lillard out, going to get Miles Turner, all these. He still has a job because he's keeping Giannis in Milwaukee, at least for now. The number one job for a general manager, keep the job. Second job, win a championship. First job, keep the job. And Nico Harrison, at least according to his own words, chose trying to win a championship over keeping the job. And he was clearly wrong in doing that because the Mavericks were literally in the finals only a few months before, less than a year before he actually made that trade. But what stands out to me about this Nico Harrison thing was before the Luka Doncic trade, you could argue he was on one of the best general manager streaks in the league. He built a championship caliber team around Luka Doncic and then traded Luka Doncic. But you think about the moves that he made prior to the Luka Doncic trade. I was making the argument a year before after their finals run, he might right now be number one in general manager power rankings based on what he had done, right? He made the trade for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. He made the decision or helped or was at least involved in that decision to tank a year before that early and end up with a lottery pick and take Derek Lively in the draft. He turned a mess of a Mavericks roster, and we forget how much of a mess that Mavericks roster was in, especially after Jalen Brunson left. After the Kristaps Porzingis thing that didn't work out, they really had no defense. After Brunson left, no co-star. And people were wondering, hey, is Luka's time in Dallas going to be over because he wants to leave? Because he realizes there's no championship team. We were comparing it to sort of the end of LeBron's first stint in Cleveland. And then Nico Harrison, within a year, turns everything around. Gets not one, but two rim-running centers to play with Luka. Gets a co-star in Kyrie Irving. And the kind of defensive talent around Luka that was good enough to get them to the 2024 finals. And within 3 games of winning a championship. I mean, this guy was up 3-1 in the finals and then blew it. And now the resume, if you look at Nico Harrison's resume, the whole thing now is you traded Luka. But before the Luka trade, the resume was awesome. I have a theory, and I think one of the reasons why Nico Harrison traded Luka Doncic. I'll have a couple of reasons why I think he ultimately did it. Right? We know about he was annoyed with Luka's off-the-court activities, the fact that he felt like he didn't have championship-winning habits, all these things. I think Nico Harrison thought that Mavericks fans were also over Luka Doncic the way that he was. And I think that's one of the key areas that he went wrong. Because I want to go back to that risk thing that I mentioned. You don't do this trade because it opens you up to risk of losing your job. And if you just do anything other than make this trade, you're keeping your job. It's not, GMs will tell you it's about winning championships. It's not really about winning championships. It's about your fan base believing that you have the potential to win a championship relatively soon. And as long as you have a guy like Luka on the roster, your fans will believe that you at least have a chance. Especially when you were just in the NBA Finals. Especially then. And that list of guys is really short. 6 guys maybe in the league that, hey, if I got this guy on my team, I feel like we at least have a shot. Luka's one of them. And then you traded him for a guy in Anthony Davis who's clearly not one of those guys. Good player, not one of those guys. But I think what Nico Harrison thought was that after losing in the finals, that he thought Mavericks fans were equally over Luka the way that he was. And that's the part that I can't figure out is, have you just keep Luka, you keep your job. You must have been so over it with this guy that you couldn't stand to be in the same building with this guy after the trade deadline. And I don't know what the nature of his relationship was with Luka Doncic. Obviously, it wasn't great. If it was, Luka would still be in Dallas. But you know, Nico Harrison built a career off of being a relationship guy, right? He worked with Nike and he had relationships with all these star players. But you know who doesn't care about that stuff? Luka Doncic. Luka's a Jordan athlete, he's technically under Nike, but you know, coming over from Europe, all this stuff, he probably didn't know who Nico Harrison was until he was working for him. He doesn't care about that stuff. And I don't think he necessarily respected Nico Harrison, and I don't think Nico Harrison respected Luka. And we've all been in situations where you're so bogged down in a task, in a project, in something at work, that you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture, forest to the trees type of thing. And I think that's what happened to Nico Harrison here, is that he just got so annoyed with the day-to-day of being around Luka. I'm not even saying it's right. I'm just saying I think this is where he was. I'm not reporting anything. I have nothing on this. This is just my guess. That he got so annoyed with the Luka stuff that he just became obsessed with figuring out a way to maximize a return on Luka Doncic. How can I send Luka out and still try to maintain a championship window and a new identity where we're going to talk about defense and we're going to do all these things? And can I get my owner on board? And can I negotiate this in a vacuum so that the fans don't turn against me? And that's the part where I say maybe he underestimated the Mavericks fan base. I still think he did. I think we've heard the reason why he only negotiated with Rob Pelinka and the Lakers was because he didn't want the Mavericks fans to turn on him before he made the trade. But I even think if you told Nico Harrison what it would be after the trade, if he knew it would be like this, I still don't know that he does it. You know? So I think he underestimated it. And my theory on that is Brian Windhorst goes on ESPN during the NBA Finals in 2024, the 2024 Finals, and blasts Luka for not playing defense after one of those games. And Windhorst was pretty roundly celebrated for that. That was considered an act of journalism. It wasn't as Stephen A. Smithy, like a first take kind of thing, because you rarely see Windhorst do it. And Windhorst, we know, talks to people. He's very connected. And I think when Windhorst said that, it reflected the sentiments in that Mavericks front office and coaching staff and in that organization. And so when he did that, I do think that Nico Harrison maybe saw the reaction to Windhorst and then felt like, yeah, I think the fans might be turning on Luka a little bit. The difference is that Brian Windhorst didn't trade the star player. He just called him out. And there's a big difference between calling out a star player and then removing him from your roster. But I think that's part of it. The other part that I think doesn't get talked about enough in terms of Nico Harrison and the Mavericks and why he traded Luka. Going back to the resume. We understand the trades that he made that worked. The PJ Washington one, the Daniel Gafford one. I think the Kyrie Irving trade lulled Nico Harrison into a false sense of security. And a false sense of, I'm smarter than everybody else in the NBA. Let's go back and remember what that Kyrie Irving trade was. Okay? Nobody in the league wanted Kyrie at that point. Nobody wanted him. Because of all the things about Kyrie Irving, he wasn't available during COVID because of the vaccine thing. He was making comments off the court. People were rolling their eyes. He was sharing, crazy things on Twitter and online. And it felt like the entire NBA was just, they were doing a collective eye roll in everything related to and associated with Kyrie Irving. And nobody wanted him. The Nets didn't want him. Kyrie wanted a contract. Nobody wanted to give him the contract. His trade value was basically nothing at that point. And then at the trade deadline in 2023, after losing Brunson, the Mavs, they trade for Kyrie. They trade Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and a first-round pick and 2 second-round picks to Brooklyn. A steal for Kyrie Irving, who is a very good player. I think he's a little overrated by the kids, right? Like there's his best nights are amazing, right? At his best, there's very few offensive players we've ever seen with his talent. At his worst, he's not that efficient. I think he has a lot more bad nights than I think people give him credit for sometimes. But, he's always playing next to a superstar like LeBron or Durant or Luka Doncic. And when he doesn't have those great nights, you don't think about it. And when he has the great nights, it's so loud because it's just so awe-inspiring and just sort of magical the way that he scores and his dribble and his handle and his layup package and all that stuff is just crazy. So it just feels like he's this like Mamba mentality type of guy. That said, he's a very good player. And when he's at his best, he's one of the best offensive players in the league and one of the best offensive players we've ever seen. And you go and get that guy for 2 role players and a first-round pick. That's a home run of a trade. And again, nobody was doing that for Kyrie. Nobody was doing that. Nico Harrison did. Nico Harrison zagged when the rest of the league was zigging against Kyrie. He said, I'm going to bet on Kyrie Irving. And we know that there was a past relationship there, Nike athletes, all that stuff, whatever. It looked like a genius move at the time. When you fast forward a year and a half later and the Mavericks are in the NBA Finals. It looks like a genius trade. Part of me wonders if that was Nico Harrison being a broken clock. And he was right twice, 2 or 3 times, I guess, before we looked at it closely and realized that the clock was broken. But I think because because he zagged when the league zigged against Kyrie Irving, because he at that point felt smarter than the rest of the NBA because the Kyrie Irving that trade worked out for him and the Dallas Mavericks when nobody else wanted to do it. I think at that point, Nico Harrison said, I was bold then. I'm going to be bold now. And he thought he was smarter than the rest of the NBA. And he makes this Luka Doncic trade. So I think that's part of it too. And now Nico Harrison doesn't have a job. And it would have been really easy for him to just not do it, keep his job, and still be running the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic, with Kyrie Irving, with the team that made the finals. Derek Lively makes improvements. Maybe you do add a guy like Najee Marshall and some of these other guys over the course of time, and you say, you know what, yeah, we're improving the roster around Luka and Kyrie and Derek Lively. Cooper Flagg's playing somewhere else. But Nico Harrison would be still in charge. Despite all of that, he'd still be in charge if he just didn't trade Luka Doncic. But he did. And I wonder if, going back to the point where Mavs fans, maybe he felt like they were a little bit more over it like he was, I wonder if you had told Nico Harrison before the trade, hey, you're going to make this trade, and then every time you walk into your own building, every time you go to work, 16,000 people are going to be chanting for you to lose your job. I wonder if he still does it. My guess is no. On the other hand, I do think there's something to be said about Nico Harrison doing this, what he deems a bold trade, despite the fact that he thought maybe whatever he thought the fan base, however it would react. But if he truly believed that the Mavericks could not win a championship with Luka Doncic as its best, highest paid player, and he thought that this was the best move to win a championship, knowing that when you trade a guy like Luka, it opens you up to risk of losing your job, he is kind of doing the thing that every fan base wants their GM to do. Not necessarily trade the superstar player that was homegrown and beloved locally, but fans don't want the GMs looking out for their best interests. Fans want the GM looking out for the team's best interest, to go win a championship above all else. And like I already said, that's the second job. The first job is keep the job. Fans want the first job to be win the championship, and the hell with your job. Nico Harrison pretty much acted that way. If indeed he truly believed that this was a better move to win a championship. Now, whatever. I don't know. I personally think that maybe he got too bogged down in just being annoyed with Luka. But I've got no reporting on it. If he did think that trading Luka for Anthony Davis and Max Christie was a better way to win a championship, he was clearly very wrong about that. So the intention really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's a results business. But I do think it's interesting to say, okay, that's why I think both of these things, all these things are true. Because even if you told a general manager, hey, you're going to you trade your superstar player away for this package, I'll give it to you. Let's say it increases your chances to win a championship by 10%, 20%. But every time you come to work, 16,000 people are going to be calling for your job. Would you do it? Nobody's doing that. Nico Harrison included. Nobody is doing that. So that's why I think even when he says, yeah, maybe I thought I could win a championship this way, I think he's still underrated how the Mavs fans were going to react to this. So I go back to the why. Why did Nico Harrison do this? I think he got bogged down in being annoyed with Luka Doncic, and I think he lost the forest through the trees. I think he was just personally just over this guy and wanted him gone. No reporting, but I'm trying to connect dots here, and that's where I come out. And he lost his job because of it, and deservedly so. And I think he underrated how fans were going to react to a Luka trade. I think he thought that they were just as down on Luka as he was. I think when Windhorst called him out, I think that maybe contributed, because he saw the reaction to that as mostly positive. And I think he was high on his own supply after the Kyrie Irving trade. I think he thought he was smarter than the rest of the league. I think he thought he was getting one over on Pelinka and the Lakers. And that clearly did not happen. And now Nico Harrison is out of a job. And not just out of a job. He didn't just lose the Mavericks job. He lost every job in a front office for the rest of his life. Because now this is the resume. You did the Kyrie job. You did the Kyrie trade. You did the PJ Washington thing. You did all that stuff. You built a championship caliber roster around Luka Doncic. Congrats. It does not matter anymore. You traded Luka. That's number one. That's the number one thing in your biography right now. That is the lead. First paragraph. Guy who traded Luka. That's what you're known for. Maybe you can go get a job somewhere on a shoe company again, behind the scenes where you're not. But he's lost every job where he's making high leverage decisions. He cannot be trusted with that anymore based on this Luka thing. That's the resume. And for some reason, Nico Harrison did the thing that nobody ever does. He traded the superstar player and he opened himself up to exactly this scenario. And it should not be surprising to him nor anybody else that this is how it turned out. So now what for the Dallas Mavericks? Well, I think you play out the rest of the year. Don't rush Kyrie Irving back. You have your pick this year. You don't have it in 2027. So if you're going to tank to try to get a guy to play next to Cooper Flag, this is the year to do it. Now, fortunately, you've already won the lottery and you've got Cooper Flag. So you don't need all this great luck. But to add another player next to Cooper Flag in Cooper Flag's window to reset this thing, that should be the goal. The other part of that then is, okay, what do you do with Kyrie? What do you do with Klay Thompson? What do you do with Anthony Davis? I would be shopping Klay right now to try to get off that longer-ish term. I think he's only got a year left after this year, but see if you can get something for him. I'm sure there's a contender out there somewhere that might be interested in Klay's shooting, even though he's having a down year a bit right now. But that could be interesting too. I think the right team. I think you look at other things. I don't necessarily think I'd be shopping PJ Washington, but I'd be open to phone calls. Daniel Gafford, ditto, right? I think there's good players on this roster that you can pitch around, right? Even guys like Caleb Martin and Najee Marshall can get a couple of second-round picks for these guys. I think all of that is possible and would just add to their assets and building around Cooper Flag in the future. But the big name is Anthony Davis. So I came up with a couple of Anthony Davis trades because I think this is the guy you have to trade. I think you got to try to, obviously you're going to want to see him when he gets healthy. Other teams are going to want to see him when he comes back and he's on the court. You're already hearing in Dallas, they're not going to rush him back. I think that's the right move because you want your asset to be healthy and in its best condition possible. So we'll see what happens, but everybody expects Anthony Davis will probably play before the trade deadline. And maybe you move him between now and then, or maybe you move him this upcoming summer and you just kind of manage his health for the rest of this season. But I do think it would behoove the Mavericks to move him sooner rather than later because when he's on the court, he's a really good player. And if he's out there and Cooper Flag continues to develop, and he's been playing a lot better lately after a rough start to his rookie year, and there is talent on this roster, and you get maybe Kyrie does decide that he wants to play again, you don't want to just kind of F around and end up winning too many games. So I do think it's probably best for the Dallas Mavericks to shop actively Anthony Davis before the trade deadline. So I came up with a few trades. I want to run them by you. The first one that I have, Anthony Davis to the Chicago Bulls. You've seen him connected to Chicago. I kind of like this for Bulls fans, or for the Bulls. Kobe White, Nikola Vucevic, and then either Patrick Williams or Zach Collins to make the money work. I like that for Chicago because yes, the fit with Anthony Davis and Josh Giddey isn't ideal. I do think they're both good enough and smart enough to figure it out. And you could stagger their minutes where you're still getting Josh Giddey all these in transition driving lanes. And then Anthony Davis can anchor that defense that I think is a little smoke and mirrors right now. And if the Bulls are looking to just be fun, then don't do anything. But if you're looking to be fun and potentially a playoff team in the Eastern Conference, this is the way to do it. This might not be enough for Anthony Davis, but Kobe White in Dallas is interesting to me as a young point guard that you could start to build with. Vucevic at least helps fill some of those minutes that you're losing with Anthony Davis, although they obviously have Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, who should get most of those minutes. Maybe you reroute Vucevic to another team and get something for him. Patrick Williams is a buy low kind of guy, even though his contract is pretty big. Or you can just put Zach Collins in there for the expiring money. But maybe Chicago has to throw in a pick or two or something like that. But those are the bones of the deal. Charlotte, I thought about Charlotte. Colin Sexton, Miles Bridges, Pat Connaughton to make the money work on an expiring, and then picks. And what's interesting about this is that the Hornets own Dallas's 2027 pick. So if I'm Dallas, that's the number one thing I'm trying to get back. It's that 2027 pick, probably another one, and then some filler here. Bridges is having a nice year. Sexton's having a nice year. Those guys can help you as role players, but nobody's replacing the star power of Anthony Davis, but you get those picks back, and that's kind of interesting. The other thing I thought about with Charlotte that I played around with, but it's a little too far for me if I'm the Hornets, is including Brandon Miller in an Anthony Davis trade. Because if I'm Dallas, I can add Brandon Miller to Cooper Flag. That to me is interesting. I have my wing tandem of the future if Brandon Miller can stay healthy. And Miller, mostly, it's just sort of freak injuries with him. I'm not super concerned about it, even though I'd like him to be healthier, obviously. But that would be interesting. I just don't know that Charlotte goes for that. The other one I had was Orlando. Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, and Wendell Carter Jr. Maybe some picks have to be in that. That's interesting to me. If I'm Dallas, I get Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black, 2 young guards on a team where I don't have any young guards to pair to Cooper Flag. That makes sense for me. I thought about Minnesota, Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle for Anthony Davis and Caleb Martin. I don't love it if I'm Dallas because Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle don't really fit. Randle, where does he really fit in on the Dallas Mavericks roster? I think it's kind of like Flag plus Randle. I've still got Lively and Gafford. I still have PJ Washington. It just kind of feels like a work. And then I have to find a place for Rudy Gobert. Do I move Rudy Gobert to another team? I don't know. It's a little too messy for me. I kind of like it for Minnesota a little bit more because now I'm upgrading that Rudy Gobert spot to Anthony Davis. The difference between Gobert and Davis is Gobert plays. Anthony Davis doesn't play. So I don't love that for either side. It's a little bit too messy. Another one I thought about, the Boston Celtics for Derek White and Anthony Simons. I think there's a fair conversation to have about who would you rather have, Anthony Davis or Derek White. Maybe that sounds crazy. And I think that sounds crazy on different ends, depending on who you talk to. I think if you talk to the NBA fan who's on Twitter all the time, they would never trade Derek White for Anthony Davis. They're like, Derek White is a way better asset than Anthony Davis. I do think we tend to forget how good Anthony Davis is as a ceiling raiser. Like when that guy's out there and healthy, he's one of the best two-way players in the league. Yeah, that's a legit top 20 guy. And as good as Derek White is, he's not that. And if you're Boston, I don't know what the answer is in the front court for you going forward. It's not Chris Boucher and Luka Garza. So this is a good way to kind of solve that. But then if you're Boston, I'm paying now Tatum, Brown, and Davis all $50+ million, and a lot more in the case of Brown and Tatum. And then Davis does have he's extension eligible coming up here pretty soon. So it's not awesome. You end up having to pay a lot of money for your top 3 players, and you're kind of in a similar situation as you are in, or that you kind of just got yourself out of in terms of being really bloated at the top of your salary cap. So I don't love that for Boston. I don't really love it for Dallas either, because as good as, like, I don't really need Anthony Simons, even though it's kind of interesting, and having Derek White is good, but he's 31. It's not really in Cooper Flag's wheelhouse, although I like the Team USA connections there, and Derek White's just good to have around. So it's not awful. I kind of like it for Dallas more than I like it for Boston, funny enough. I thought about Anthony Davis to Atlanta for Trae Young, just straight up. Trae Young back to the team that drafted him, the Dallas Mavericks. That would be kind of an interesting story. That would be a good day of stories for the Dallas Mavericks beat writers. But for Atlanta, you basically replace, or you have Kristaps Porzingis and Anthony Davis and Onyeka Okongwu. I think you could play versions of two of the 3 of those guys at different times. And then there's the other part of, well, you're probably not going to have Porzingis and Anthony Davis healthy all the time together at the same time. So at least this way, it's maybe there's like a one or the other type of situation where you're able to maintain their health and pace them a little bit more. And plus, Anthony Davis is just better than those guys. That's also part of this. And if you're Dallas, you get Trae Young as a true point guard to pair next to Cooper Flag and help set Cooper Flag up. I don't hate it. I don't hate that for either side, really. What's the other one I have? Oh, this one's fun. What if the Spurs got in on that? You have to include the Spurs in all of these conversations because they have so much stuff. They have so many tradable salaries. And it's not like they're exactly on the clock to trade these salaries, but Harrison Barnes isn't expiring. They have a lot of contracts that are expiring, come off the books. Chunky salaries that if you move them now, you could potentially upgrade that spot or make a big upgrade to the roster. The Western Conference is tough. The Spurs have been a little up and down. Do they want to go all in? We always talk about them as a Giannis team. Could they be an Anthony Davis team and do a similar thing that they did with De'Aaron Fox where this is a good player. It's not Giannis, but we also don't have to give up all of our stuff. And we kind of have our guy. We have Wemby. Do we even really want Giannis here? Which sounds crazy, but we're building around Wemby, and if we have Giannis, then this becomes Giannis's team. But we have Wembanyama. We added De'Aaron Fox. It's still Wembanyama's team. We had Anthony Davis. This is still Wembanyama's team. Anthony Davis, De'Aaron Fox, and Victor Wembanyama is really interesting to me. Defensively, what a nightmare. Nobody's scoring in the paint. You could play them together. You could play them separate. You're getting 48 minutes of elite rim protection. Might be the best rim protection in the league, those two guys, when healthy. And that does a lot for a defense. I mean, that's a defense that immediately moves up into probably number one category. All right, Oklahoma City exists. Like top 3, top 2 category right away. As long as those guys are healthy. Could you do it for Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson, contracts, and a bunch of picks? If I'm Dallas, that's interesting to me because I'm getting some expirings and I'm getting a bunch of picks, which is really what I need if I'm the Mavericks in building around Cooper Flag. That's really what I want. Keldon Johnson, nice player, score guy. I can use some juice offensively if I'm Dallas. That helps. And if I'm the Spurs, now I have a lineup of Anthony Davis, Victor Wembanyama. I still got Luke Cornett coming off the bench. By the way, still have De'Aaron Fox. Still have the Stephon Castle. Still have Dylan Harper. I'm not moving any of those guys. I'm throwing a bunch of picks your way. I don't know. Thought it was interesting. Like I said, the Spurs have to be included. Here's what I do know. Nico Harrison is gone, and so is his vision. That 3-year plan, defense wins championships, all of that is gone. We also know that the Dallas Mavericks are going to have to make a move here relatively soon, that they're not done. Trades are coming, changes are coming. And whatever this next trade is, more likely than not, will tell us what this next direction is for the Dallas Mavericks.